In this edition of Field Notes, we share the voice of a person who found himself, again and again, called to a life of nonviolent activism. I first heard the name David Duncombe at a banquet in Pendleton, Oregon in 2007. He was called forward to accept an award called the Justice and Witness Award. The occasion was a gathering, annual gathering of 50 churches of the Central Pacific Conference of the United Church of Christ. And with 200 other delegates, I stood to applaud this remarkable man. David Duncombe, we were told, had been arrested more than 100 times protesting violence conducted by our U.S. government, including the Vietnam War, sending arms to the Contras, and the recruitment of young men and women to fight the Iraqi War. More recently, David undertook 3 separate 45-day fasts on the steps of Congress, which he did to advocate for legislation to lessen world hunger through the cancellation of third world debt. David did this following his retirement from university work and chaplaincy. He was between the ages of 70 and 80 when he conducted these fasts. And he would begin by walking the corridors of Congress, meeting staff and legislators, and it was only over time that they realized that by fasting, he was living his message. David said, "Words are cheap and words are plentiful in Washington, but prayer and fasting are not." As I listened to the citation of his award, I was reminded of Jesus leaving the safety of Nazareth in order to go to Jerusalem and speak truth to power. The man who came forward to accept the award was tall and thin and soft-spoken. And he said more than a polite thank you. David gave his reasons for his Washington fast. He said, "The first reason is quite personal and based on my religious faith. God has given us a world of great abundance to share with one another, and we have not shared. Instead, there is hunger and starvation among many of God's people, and I share in that. I have lost the desire to eat when others cannot eat, and the will to benefit from their poverty. The second reason I fast is rather public. It is to put a living face on starvation. I am, in my starvation, representing millions of faceless, voiceless, and powerless people, thousands of whom are dying each day. I am no statistic hobbling into U.S. congressional offices. I cannot be dismissed and forgotten as a meaningless number. I am a person, and I will remain a person to whomever tries to put me out of their mind or memory." As we stood to applaud him and his receiving of that award, the minister standing next to me leaned over and said, "Someone has just raised the bar awfully high." After the banquet, I introduced myself, congratulated David on his award. And that led to a friendship and eventually to my request to come to his home in White Salmon, Washington, and record an interview in which he shared his reasons for a life of political activism. David agreed, and in preparation I did a little homework. I learned that David was born in 1928 on a farm in the state of New York, that his father was a career Army officer and his mother was an artist. She wrote children's books. Following high school in 1946, David joined the Army and he served 2 tours of duty. Then he attended Dartmouth College His interest was in government and political science. Then he went on to graduate school at Union Theological Seminary to study with Reinhold Niebuhr. I was interested to find that he went to seminary not for religious reasons, but in order to find a deep ground for his political values. And it was only years later that he felt a call to Christian ministry and was ordained in 1958 in the United Church of Christ. That was the same year that he married the love of his life, Sally Morton. In 1960, David enrolled in Yale University to pursue a PhD, and he ended up staying at Yale for 22 years, becoming the first chaplain of the medical school and then a professor at the divinity school. His passions: clinical pastoral education, counseling, and spiritual direction. He and Sally were blessed with 3 children, Betsy, Jane, and Stephen. Our mother, said Betsy, was the unsung hero. She was attentive to our family so Dad could be attentive to the world. Throughout the 1960s, David was involved in the civil rights movement, and he led the security detail for Martin Luther King's historic march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. David and his family then moved to California, where he went to teach at the University of California. And it was there that he became involved in demonstrations against military aid to the Contras in Nicaragua. These demonstrations were held at the Concord Naval Weapons Station, and they were conducted 24 hours, 7 days a week for 6 years, the longest demonstration in American history. During the first 4 years, protesters blocked every train, and like many of his colleagues, David was arrested countless times. I learned to fast while I was in jail, he said. I also learned how important prayer was to a successful outcome. They go together. On the day I drove to White Salmon to record an interview with David, I was accompanied by filmmaker Michael Harrington. We found his white house, parked our car next to his worn-out vehicle, and I was delighted to see that on the back bumper were a number of peace stickers, including John Lennon's "They say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one." Sally, his wife of 47 years, had died recently, and David lived alone. As Michael arranged the camera and lights in the living room, David told me that he had been thinking about the sources of his activism and had discovered 4 incidents in his life which had surprised and changed him. Sitting in his easy chair, holding a single piece of paper, that is what David shared.
Looking back on the last 60 years of my life, it seems that certain uncomfortable situations have been more of a shaper of what I've become and what I've done than all the books and sermons and whatever that have come my way. And the reason for that, I think, is that uncomfortable situations move you into action. And then action sort of awakens you to what's inside and what you feel you must do in life. And I like to talk about 4 of these. The first happened when I was about 19 years old, and I found myself as a soldier in post-war Germany, in Frankfurt, which was really beaten up. And it was a nice time in my life, but I was uncomfortable living in the midst of so much poverty. And one of my passions at that time was chocolate, and I loved chocolate, and so did the Germans, and cigarettes. I didn't like cigarettes, but the Germans did. But I could buy both on my ration every week at the post exchange. And one day I was walking back with a satchel of chocolate, my ration of 10 chocolate bars, and a group of boys started following me and calling out, chocolate, chocolate with the mister. And I began to tense up, and I walked a little faster, but they caught up with me, and I remember very distinctly on the stone bridge, something snapped inside of me, and I said to myself something like, I can't go on living life this way, having something that other people need, and pretending not. And so I opened the satchel and gave up the chocolate. And I knew at that point that what I was going to do in life was in the public service area. And I didn't know any more. I wasn't religious, I hadn't been to church or whatever, but I knew that I had to do this. In 1963, about 15 years later, I found myself in seminary, becoming a minister. And some of my southern friends asked me to go with them to do voter registration in Mississippi, southern Mississippi. Those were wild days down there, and I had the only car, so I felt that I should go down there with them. Well, about 10 days later, and a whole bunch of things happened, I found myself being chased through the woods at night by the sheriff's posse and dogs. I hear those crackling radios, and they had been arrested and then let go because they wanted to give the townsfolk a little sport, I guess. I was terrified. And had they caught me, I'm pretty sure that I would have been lynched and strung up in one of those trees. It was a dark night, and one trick that I had learned in the army, that when you come to a stream, you get in the stream and you walk in the stream so the scent is not. And I walked all night. And it occurred to me during that walk that I couldn't trust authority anymore. I couldn't trust the police. They weren't guarding me. I couldn't trust the representatives of my government. The FBI said they were going to protect me, and they didn't. They gave me their word. And this led me to involve myself further in the civil rights, and I kept going down until I was able to help organize and run the Selma to Montgomery March in the spring of '65, which eventuated in the Civil Rights Act of 1965. It wasn't my choice to be there. I was just, when you get into this action mode, that's what happens. And then you see that this is important for you, and you discover something in your own life. In 1987, when a couple of veterans and I were involved in an incident at Concord Naval Weapons Station outside of San Francisco, I was asked to do a 40-day fast and block the first munitions train coming out of the gates headed for Central America, the for the Contras and for the Salvadoran government, so they killed their own population. I don't know what scared me the most, the idea of a 40-day fast or standing in front of a train. I think what scared me really was the knowledge that I was going to do it, that by this time in my life I could not do it. Well, I went out and met this veteran, Brian Wilson, and he was organizing this thing, and I asked him, why he risked his life for people so far away he didn't even know. He said very simply, because they're not worth less than we, and we're not worth more than they. The day that was appointed, I'll never forget that one, September 1st, 1987, Brian and I and another veteran were on the tracks, and the train hadn't come out, but we could see it, ready to come out. We'd gone and talked with the Navy, told them that for the 4th time what we were going to do. The police had come and said, no, we're going to stop the train and then give you a chance to get off the tracks, and if you don't, we'll take you to jail and so forth and so forth. Well, it was okay with us. And, well, of course, it didn't happen that way. What happened was the train speeded up to over 3 times the speed limit. A split second before the train ran over us, Duncan and I jumped. But Brian was sitting, and the train ran over him and cut off his legs, broke open his skull. As I looked at him, his dismembered body, and a pool of blood underneath the train, it seemed to me I saw Jesus on the cross. And I heard again Brian's words, we're not worth more than they, they're not worth less than us. And that vision, those words is kind of seared into my mind, and for the next 6 years I was out there on the tracks at least once a week, blocking munitions trains and trucks. Got arrested over 100 times, spent time in jail, did even another fast in jail. And I can't explain it other than when you step out and do something like that, you become more involved and you see more of what's inside of you and what you're to do in life. So the last thing that kind of illustrates what I'm trying to say is, it happened not too long ago. I was sitting right here in this same chair reading I forget it was the Washington Post or a news magazine, and I came across a statistic that simply blew me away, and the statistic said that 19,000 sub-Saharan children died of starvation every day. Not AIDS, not other things, just starvation. And this bothered me so much I couldn't sleep. And I knew I was going to have to do something about it. And I didn't know what, but then I thought, well, you know, I've done a number of fasts. Maybe if I go to Washington and fast in Congress and starve myself, I could illustrate, I could symbolize these starving kids. And that's what I did in '99 and again in 2000. I went down there while there was this piece of legislation called Jubilee 2000. It's a international movement, and that's what we did. And I just walked into a congressman's office and You know, I wouldn't say I was fasting. I just say I want to talk to you about this bill, but I go back every week or 10 days. Now I get weaker and weaker with a cane and a walker, finally a wheelchair. And pretty soon they'd ask me. And I say, well, you know, the people who are really suffering, the people who are really starving can't walk through the door like I can. But now you have to look at a starving person and you have to decide for yourself whether you are going to help these people. So that's pretty much what I've been doing. And I last fast was last year. Practically died. Fasting long-term, 45, 50 days, is not as difficult as it sounds, but it takes an awful lot out of an older person. And I practically died. Had to be wheeled around most of the time, but as long as I could go through a congressman's door, I felt that I should continue my fast. And so all I can say is I've been inspired by writings of and sermons and books and things like that. I'm sure they've influenced me in some way to a life of action, but nothing like these actions that occur once I feel in quiet in my heart, uncomfortable, and I see something that has to be done, and that leads me into action. And then when I'm in the action, I'm able to see myself better and what I should be doing. And I can't say any more than that.
As I listen to David, I'm struck by his humility and passion which accompany his words, and his attentiveness to what his heart said to him, and also his courage to sacrifice. I'm especially helped by his comment, "Over the period of my life, it is uncomfortable situations which shaped me, moved me into action, and action then awakened me inside to what I must do with my life." I had always thought it was the other way around, that first we decided on a direction for our life and acted accordingly. How good to find out that we need not wait, that the conscience which moves us to action already knows the way. For purposes of review and discussion, here's a list of the 4 events which David shared. 1, 1947, as a U.S. soldier stationed in post-war Germany. David said, "I can't go on living this way, having something others need." 2, 1963, with Union Theological Seminary students doing voter registration in southern Mississippi. David said, "I found that I couldn't trust authority anymore, not police, not representatives of our government." 3, 1987, with Brian Wilson and other veterans who fasted for 40 days, then blocked a train at the Concord Naval Weapons Station carrying ammunition to the Contras in Central America. Brian Wilson said, "Because they're not worth less than you, and we're not worth more than they." And David saying, "When you step out, you see more of what's inside of you and do more with your life." 4, 1999, Washington Post article, 19,000 children in the sub-Saharan desert die of starvation every day. David said, "After reading that statistic, I couldn't sleep. I knew that I had to do something about it." David Duncombe said, "I've been inspired by books and sermons, But it is the moments when I felt unquiet in my heart, that uncomfortableness, that has led me to see something that must be done. And taking action, I see what I must do more of in the world.